It's Saturday, and the usual weekend restlessness hangs in the air. My friends and I are sitting in my living room, flicking through Netflix but finding nothing that grabs our interest. We're all natives of a small suburban town that's known for its scenic beauty but lacks the excitement that we, as a group of early 20-somethings, crave. Chelsea, my childhood friend, is the first to break the silence. We could go hiking. The weather's perfect, and we haven't done that in ages, she suggests. Mason, the adventure junkie of our group, immediately perks up at the idea. I'm in. There's that trail through Hemlock Forest we never finished exploring. Julie, Mason's younger sister and the youngest among us, looks up from her phone. As long as it's not too brutal, I don't want to come back all sweaty and disgusting. Tom, always the laid-back one, shrugs and agrees. Sure, why not? Beats sitting here doing nothing. Hemlock Forest is a sprawling natural reserve, just a 20-minute drive from my place. The forest is a local favorite for hiking, birdwatching, and occasionally camping. We've explored parts of it over the years, but it's so vast that there's always something new to discover. We arrive at the entrance of the forest trail and park my SUV in the designated area. Mason takes out a trail map he printed earlier and spreads it on the hood of the car. So, we are here. He points at a spot on the map. And I was thinking we could hike up to here. His finger moves to another point, marked by a small lake icon. It should be about a 3-hour hike, round trip. We all agree, and soon enough we're walking on the forest trail. The air smells of damp earth, and the further we go, the more serene it becomes. We talk, laugh, and take occasional selfies, completely at ease in each other's company. The air is fresh, but carries the distinct scent of damp earth mixed with pine. It fills my nostrils as I breathe in, making me feel invigorated. We're walking along a dirt path, worn from the tread of animals more than humans. The ground is uneven, filled with roots and small rocks, but we manage to maintain a steady pace. A few rays of sunlight pierce through the foliage above, casting patches of light on the forest floor. We're talking and laughing, each of us in high spirits, when Tom, who is at the front of our little procession, suddenly stops and points. Just ahead of us, barely visible between the thick trees, is the silhouette of a structure. It takes a moment for our eyes to adjust, but soon it becomes clear that it's a mansion. It's large, and even from this distance, it's obvious that the place hasn't been touched in a long time. As we draw closer to the mansion, it looms larger and larger in front of us. The facade is weather-beaten, the paint peeling off in large flakes, revealing the worn wood beneath. The windows are set deep into the walls and are mostly boarded up, with a few left exposed but covered in so much grime that they are almost opaque. Above, the roof appears to be sagging in places, likely damaged by years of neglect and exposure to the elements. Ivy and vines crawl up the sides of the mansion, winding their way around the pillars that frame the front porch. The wooden steps leading up to the front door are rotting in places, making us cautious as we ascend. On the porch, several old chairs lay toppled over, and a rusty swing hangs lopsided, its chains groaning softly in the wind. To the side of the front door, a tarnished bronze plaque is screwed into the wall, but the engraving has been worn away by years of weather, rendering it unreadable. We approach cautiously, curiosity outweighing any sense of fear or apprehension. As we get closer, we see that the windows are caked in layers of dirt and grime, making it hard to see inside. As we stand before the front door, I notice the detailing around its frame. Despite the deterioration, intricate carvings of leaves and what seem to be faces are etched into the wood. The doorknob is rusted but still intact, and it's accompanied by an old-fashioned lock that seems to require a large, ornate key. The door itself stands slightly ajar, creaking softly as a breeze pushes against it. Chelsea is the first to voice the thought that is on all our minds. "Should we go in?" she asks, looking at each of us for an answer. Mason and Julie seem excited at the prospect, while Tom has that adventurous gleam in his eyes. I feel a sense of excitement, but also a nagging curiosity that urges me to explore what's inside. We make a collective decision to go for it. After all, how often do you come across an abandoned mansion in the middle of the forest? We take a moment to ready ourselves, checking our phone flashlights and taking a deep breath. Finally, Tom takes the lead and pushes the front door open. It creaks loudly, echoing through the empty halls of the mansion. Inside the mansion, the darkness envelops us almost immediately. Our eyes take a moment to adjust, but even then the interior is dim. Slivers of sunlight sneak in through tiny gaps in the boarded-up windows, creating thin beams that cut through the air, revealing floating particles of dust. We quickly pull out our phones, turning on the flashlights to help us see better. The floor beneath us creaks as we walk, echoing softly through the empty hallways. Dust covers nearly everything, laying like a thin blanket over old worn-out furniture that populates the rooms. Frayed and faded rugs are scattered on the wooden floors, and long heavy curtains hang from the windows, their colors dulled by age. The walls are decorated with paintings in ornate frames, depicting landscapes and portraits that have faded over time. Silverware, now tarnished and dull, is arranged in glass cabinets, and other oddities like vintage clocks and ceramic figurines are placed haphazardly throughout the rooms. "Who lived here?" Julie asks. We're all thinking the same thing as we take in our surroundings. Maybe some old millionaire with too much time and money, I suggest, half joking but also pondering the possibility. Finally, we come across a room that takes our breath away. It's filled with statues, each sculpted with such meticulous detail that they look incredibly lifelike. One shows a woman with a look of terror, her hands raised as if to fend off some unseen horror. Another is of a man caught in an expression of utter surprise, his eyes wide and mouth open. Another portrays a child, her face etched in sadness, sitting alone. The artistry is stunning. From the wrinkles on their clothes to the texture of their hair, each statue is a masterpiece of craftsmanship. We're all momentarily speechless, captivated by the unsettling yet fascinating display before us. "These look so real," Chelsea finally says, her voice filled with a mixture of awe and disbelief. She moves her flashlight closer to the face of one of the statues, illuminating its lifelike features. "Almost too real," Mason replies. "Kind of gives me the creeps." He takes a step back, as if putting some distance between him and the statue would make him feel more at ease. "Smile," Tom announces, already holding up his phone to capture the moment. We gather around the statues, mimicking their frozen expressions with exaggerated, scared faces of our own. The flashlight from Tom's phone flickers for a second before it captures us, adding to the eerie atmosphere. Chelsea decides to pose next to a particularly intriguing statue. It depicts a man who appears to be in the midst of running away, his face distorted in a look of sheer terror. "This guy looks like he saw a ghost," she jokes, chuckling as she moves her phone to find the right angle for a photo. "Or became one," Mason quips, looking directly at the statue as if expecting it to reveal its secrets. "Okay, let's not get carried away," I interject, trying to add a touch of reason to the escalating imaginations. "They're just statues." Who has been rather quiet finally speaks up. "The detail is incredible. Look at the eyes. They seem almost wet." She leans in closer, her flashlight fixed on the statue's eyes that do, indeed, seem to glisten, as if on the verge of tears. "Props to the artist," Tom acknowledges, busy taking more photos from various angles. The clicks of his phone camera fill the room momentarily. Chelsea starts taking her own series of photos. "These will look great on Instagram," she laughs, seemingly forgetting the unsettling atmosphere as she gets absorbed in framing the perfect shot. We all join the impromptu photo session, capturing the room from every conceivable angle. It's as if we've stumbled upon a hidden art gallery deep within the woods. The air is thick with an unsettling but captivating atmosphere. We're all joking and laughing, carried away by the thrill of this unexpected discovery. The ambiance may be creepy, but there's a tangible sense of excitement too. Each of us feels like an explorer, as if we've uncovered a treasure hidden away from the world. As I scroll through the pictures on my phone, I'm struck by an unsettling observation. I zoom in on one of the statues and then another. The feeling is hard to shake. It's like the eyes of these stone figures are following us, locked onto us even through the lens of my camera. I tell myself it's just my imagination, fueled by the eerie atmosphere of the mansion. I quickly shake off the thought, dismissing it as a product of the charged environment. "All right, guys, what's next?" I ask, pocketing my phone and looking around at my friends to gauge their interest. Mason, who has been looking at a dusty old map hanging on the wall, turns to us and says, "Why don't we head upstairs? Who knows what other cool stuff we'll find there?" Chelsea, who has been oddly quiet since we entered the room, hesitates for a moment before finally agreeing. "Okay, but I swear if I see a ghost or anything, I'm out of here so fast you won't even see me go." We all laugh at Chelsea's remark, amused but also a tad nervous considering the surroundings. Our flashlights dance around the room one last time as we begin to move toward the staircase. As we exit the room, I cast a final glance back at the statues. In their unchanging stillness, their eyes seem to follow our movements, watching us with a mysterious, unnerving focus as we leave the room and proceed to discover what lies ahead. We reach the top of the staircase and step onto a worn carpet that has seen better days. The hallway stretches out in front of us, long and narrow, their paint peeling and knobs tarnished. Cobwebs hang in the corners, and the air is filled with the smell of mildew and old wood. It's quiet up here, eerily so, amplifying the tension among us. "Let's split up and explore," Tom suggests, his voice breaking the silence. His eyes are wide, eager to delve into each room and discover what's hidden. We can cover more ground that way. I glance at Chelsea. Her face is tight, and her eyes meet mine with a mixture of caution and apprehension. "I don't know, guys," she starts, gripping her flashlight tightly, and her knuckles turn white. "It's getting dark, and there's something about this place that doesn't sit right with me." Julie rolls her eyes, but there's an undercurrent of excitement in her voice. "Come on, Chelsea. Where's your sense of adventure? This is the kind of stuff you see in movies. We have to explore it." Chelsea looks torn. She shifts her weight from one foot to the other, contemplating. "Fine," she finally says with a sigh of resignation, "but I'm serious. If anything weird happens, I'm out of here. No questions asked." Chelsea's concerns hang in the air, but the allure of the unknown propels us forward. We each pick a door, place our hands on the tarnished knobs, and step into separate rooms. As I step into my chosen room, I notice the smell of old paper and leather. Shelves filled with books line the walls, their spines faded from years of neglect. Dust particles float in the air, caught in the beams of my flashlight. Maps are spread out on a wooden table in the center of the room, their corners curled and yellowed. It's a remarkable collection, each item a preserved piece of history begging to be explored. I pick up a book from a shelf, its cover worn and frayed. As I flip through its brittle pages, trying to make sense of the handwritten notes in the margins, I hear something. Whispers fill the room, faint but unmistakable. They seem to come from nowhere and everywhere at the same time. I shake my head, dismissing it as the wind or the natural sounds of an old house. It's easy to let your imagination run wild in a place like this. When I exit the room and step back into the hallway, the whispers seem to follow me. They grow louder and more pronounced, though I still can't make out what they're saying. A cold shiver runs down my spine. It's a sound that doesn't belong here. I quicken my pace, eager to distance myself from it. Finally, we all gather back in the hallway, flashlights pointing in all directions as we share our findings. Julie is visibly thrilled, her face glowing as she recounts her discovery. "You guys wouldn't believe it! I found a room filled with antique dolls!" she exclaims, her eyes shining with excitement. Mason is equally animated, unable to contain his enthusiasm. "I came across this workshop," he starts, "and it was like stepping into a mad scientist's. There were all these mechanical devices, cogs and gears, stuff I've never seen before. It's amazing." Tom pulls out his phone and starts swiping through photos. "Check this out," he says, showing us an old photo album he found. The pictures are in black and white, capturing moments and people long gone. "These must be from decades ago, maybe even a century," he adds, fascinated by the glimpse into the past. We listen to each other, buzzing with the thrill of our individual discoveries. but I can't shake the lingering feeling of unease. Chelsea is unusually quiet. What about you, Chelsea? Find anything interesting? I heard whispers, she says, visibly uneasy. I thought it was my imagination, but they were there. We should leave. I have a bad feeling about this place. You heard whispers too? I interject before anyone else can respond. I thought it was just the house settling or the wind, but now I'm not so sure. Mason laughs it off. You're both just letting this place get to you. It's all in your head. I agree with Mason, Julie adds. It's easy to get spooked in a place like this, but it's all just part of the adventure. Chelsea looks around at all of us, clearly frustrated that we're brushing off her concerns. I'm telling you, something is off about this place. We should leave. Look, let's just explore a bit more and then we'll go, okay? I suggest, trying to keep the peace. We continue our exploration, but the atmosphere is noticeably different. It's darker now, the evening light outside replaced by pitch black. Even the most skeptical among us, Mason and Julie, seem more cautious now. I can't shake this gut feeling that we're not alone in this place. Let's head back downstairs. Mason finally breaks the silence. I think we've seen enough for one day. No one argues, not even Julie, who was earlier the most excited among us. We start our descent, our steps quicker than before, our grips on our flashlights tighter. Each step on the staircase creaks louder than I remember, as if the house itself is mirroring our own heightened state of alert. Just as we reach the last steps, and I'm beginning to think we're overreacting, it happens. A loud crash comes from upstairs. It's a sound you can't mistake. Like something heavy being knocked over or thrown, we all freeze, our flashlights pointing in different directions, our faces marked with the same expression of fear. Chelsea's earlier warning replays in my mind, and I feel a shiver run down my spine. She was right. Something is off about this place. We should have listened. Even Mason, usually the bravest among us, looks shaken. We can't deny it any longer. It's time to leave this place. We freeze, the sound still echoing in our ears. Our eyes meet, and it's clear we're all thinking the same thing. Something is wrong here, and it's no longer just a fun adventure. The atmosphere is heavy, filled with tension that wasn't there before. What was that? Chelsea's voice breaks the silence, her tone full of urgency. This isn't the first time she's voiced her concerns, and now we're all listening. No idea, but I'm not sticking around to find out, Mason replies, his voice noticeably shaky. For the first time today, there's unanimous agreement. No one suggests staying a moment longer to solve the mystery of that noise or any of the other oddities we've encountered. We've all had enough, and the priority now is to get out and put as much distance between us and this mansion as possible. I reach for the doorknob with a trembling hand and twist it. It doesn't move, not even a millimeter. I apply more force, my muscles straining against the stubborn metal, but the door stays closed. Guys, the door won't open, I announce, my voice heavy with a sense of impending doom. Chelsea's eyes widen, her voice full of alarm. What do you mean won't open? Exactly what it sounds like. The door won't budge. It's like it's jammed or locked. His face set in a determined grimace. Out of the way, he grumbles. Gripping the doorknob with both hands, he pulls with all the strength he can muster. His efforts yield no result. The door remains as immovable as before. He steps back, visibly frustrated. You've got to be kidding me. As we stand there staring at each other in disbelief, a sudden noise reverberates through the mansion's dark hallways. The unmistakable sound of a door slamming shut, its echo lingering ominously in the air. An involuntary shiver runs down my spine at the sound. It's followed by footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming from an indeterminate location within the house. We quickly aim our flashlights down the corridor from where the sound seems to originate. The beams of light reveal nothing. The hallway is empty, but the sense that we're not alone is stronger than ever. That's it. I'm officially freaked out, Julie declares, her voice shaky and high-pitched. Her eyes dart around the room, as if expecting something to jump out at her. What do we do now? Tom clears his throat, trying to sound more confident than he feels. We need to find another way out. Maybe there's a back door or a window big enough to climb through. His voice wavers, failing to hide his own fear. We begin navigating back through the mansion. We move as a group, flashlights in hand, cutting through the growing darkness. The rooms we pass through now feel different. The shadows are deeper, and the air feels thicker. It's as if the house itself has changed in response to our discovery. As we walk, my skin tingles with the sensation of being watched. I glance over my shoulder more than once, half expecting to see something in the darkness behind us. But there's nothing. The feeling persists though, gnawing at the back of my mind. Our footsteps echo on the wooden floors, each creak and groan magnified in the suffocating silence. Chelsea, who's been scrolling through her phone for the past few minutes, suddenly freezes. Her face is pale and her eyes are widened in disbelief. "Guys, you need to see this," she says. We huddle around her, staring at the phone screen. Displayed are the photos she snapped earlier of the room filled with statues. "Look at their clothes. Notice anything?" I focus on the attire worn by the statues. My stomach tightens as recognition dawns. The fabrics, the styles, the colors, these aren't just random outfits. They strongly resemble the clothes described in multiple missing persons reports that have been circulating in the local news. Mason's eyes narrow and he clenches his fists. "This can't be real," he says, barely able to get the words out. His voice is a mixture of disbelief and dawning horror. Continuing her point, Chelsea's voice trembles. "Think about it. These statues are those missing people, somehow transformed into stone. I can't explain how, but what else could it be? That's beyond insane. People don't just turn into statues. How could something like that even happen?" "I can't answer that," Chelsea responds, her voice low and shaky. "But consider everything we've experienced, the whispers we can't locate, the footsteps with no source, a door that won't budge. This place is wrong. We need to accept that we're not just dealing with something odd. We're in genuine danger." Suddenly, the footsteps we heard earlier return. This time they're closer, more pronounced, as though homing in on our location. "Run!" I yell. We scatter, each of us sprinting down different hallways. The footsteps behind us amplify, echoing our own frantic pace. I eventually find myself back in the room filled with statues. With no other option, I slip behind a heavy curtain that hangs next to a tall bookshelf. My heart thunders in my chest, and sweat beads on my forehead as I crouch down and wait. After a tense minute, I peek from behind the curtain. I half expect to see some grotesque creature or malevolent entity in the room. But there's nothing. Just the silent figures of the statues staring vacantly. I exhale, not even aware that I've been holding my breath. Just as I begin to entertain the idea of leaving my hiding spot, my phone buzzes in my pocket. The vibration is startling in the silent room, and I quickly mute the phone before pulling it out. It's a message from Chelsea. "Found a window in the kitchen. Meet us there. Hurry." My eyes dart to the door, considering the quickest route to the kitchen. My heart is pounding as I navigate the maze-like layout of the mansion. Every turn seems identical, yet different in a subtle, unsettling way. Suddenly, a scream slices through the air. It's Julie, I'm certain. I quickly veer off my initial path towards where the scream came from. When I arrive, I find myself in front of a room with mirrors lining the walls, framed in gold but tarnished with age. The reflections they cast are warped and stretched. When I enter, Julie, Mason, and Chelsea are already inside. Their faces tell me everything before I even have a chance to speak. Julie is clutching her arm with her remaining good hand. Her other arm is no longer flesh and blood, but a morbid shade of gray, solid and stone-like. Mason and Chelsea stand beside her, their faces drained of color. They look at Julie's arm and then at each other, and I can see the unspoken realization pass between them. This situation has escalated into something more terrifying than any of us could have imagined. "What happened?" I ask as I stop dead in my tracks. Julie looks at us, her eyes wide with terror, tears already spilling down her cheeks. "My arm, It's turning to stone, she exclaims. We're momentarily paralyzed, unsure of what to do next. Chelsea is the first to break the silence, her voice shaky but filled with resolve. We need to find a way out now, she declares. We all nod, knowing that hesitation isn't an option. We need a key, he finally says, his voice laced with urgency but also tinged with hopelessness. There has to be one somewhere. The mention of a key triggers a memory. I recall seeing an old weathered cabinet in one of the previous hallways we passed through. Overlooked and unopened, it hadn't seemed significant at the time. But now it might be our best shot. There might be a key in that cabinet down the hall. Could be a place someone would store room keys in a house that's this big, I suggest, already backing toward the door. We waste no time and sprint out of the room toward the hallway where I remember seeing the old cabinet. We reach the cabinet, and without hesitation, I yank the cabinet door open. A billow of dust erupts, causing us to cough and shield our eyes. But amidst the yellowed papers and forgotten trinkets, I see it. A tarnished metal key. My fingers wrap around it just as another sound fills the air. The footsteps are back, louder and faster, reverberating through the hallways as if in pursuit. Go, go, go! Mason yells, his voice tinged with a mix of desperation and adrenaline. We tear back through the mansion. Those footsteps are now unnervingly close and following us, as if taunting our efforts to escape. Julie is struggling to keep up, her stone-like arm weighing her down, impeding her balance and speed. But failure isn't an option. We have to get out of this nightmarish place. Breathless, we finally arrive at the door that promises freedom, the outside world just beyond its threshold. With shaking hands, I insert the key into the lock and twist. The sound of the lock disengaging is the most beautiful click I've ever heard. But just as I put my weight against the door to swing it open, an invisible force slams it back into place. The sudden movement nearly traps my hand between the door and the frame. Before I can think, Mason is pushing against the door with all his weight, and Chelsea and I join him. Push harder! Mason's voice breaks through the tension, reaching a new level of urgency. Eventually, with a sound like a sigh of defeat, the door finally gives way, creaking loudly as it opens, but the next sound I hear snuffs out any feeling of euphoria. It's a horrific collection of cracks and grinding noises. I whip my head around and find Julie rooted to the spot. Her eyes are wide and filled with sheer terror. Guys, I can't move, she yells with a panic that I've never heard before, and it's enough to stop us all in our tracks. We turn to rush toward her, but it's as if time speeds up just to mock us. Julie's skin starts to lose its color, rapidly turning a dull shade of gray. Her flesh hardens, and her face sets in an agonizing expression that could only be described as a scream frozen in time. In that moment, Julie becomes unrecognizable, another lifeless statue among the many that haunt this forsaken mansion. The room fills with a heavy silence, only punctuated by our shaky breaths and the loud beating of my heart in my ears. Reality sinks in. Julie is gone, another victim of whatever malevolent force controls this place. This can't be happening, Mason shouts, his eyes wide and frantic as he stares at what was once Julie. Chelsea's body gives way under the emotional weight. She drops to her knees, her face contorted in a grimace. Her hands are trembling so violently she has to clasp them together to stop it. We have to go. We have to lock this place up and never come back, she utters, her voice so low it's almost swallowed by her shaky breaths. I look at the statue that used to be Julie. Her features are frozen in a display of eternal terror. Yeah, we have to leave now, I agree. Each word feeling like it's being pulled from somewhere deep inside me, somewhere I didn't know existed until now. The door is heavy, but I manage to pull it shut. With my hand trembling, I manage to slide the key into the lock. The click of the latch echoes, severing our connection to the nightmare behind us. Mason takes the key from my shaking hand and hurls it with all his might into the thick woods that encircle the mansion. We trudge through the woods, our footsteps muffled by the damp soil and fallen leaves. The mansion recedes into the distance. Its haunting silhouette is eventually concealed by a thick wall of trees. We're quiet as we walk, unable to say anything. The sole interruption to our thoughts is the sound of our steps crushing leaves and snapping twigs. The rest of the world doesn't care. The nocturnal creatures are busy with their own lives, their noises filling the air as we walk. When we finally emerge from the woods, the contrast is jarring. Cars speed along the road ahead of us, headlights shining and radios playing. People are going about their evening, laughing or arguing, blissfully ignorant of the cruel reality hidden just beyond their sight. I glance at Mason and Chelsea. They look as shattered as I feel. Their faces are pale and their eyes, devoid of their usual spark, seem to be staring at something far away. We are survivors, but the scars are deep. I start the car and we drive off, each of us lost in our own world. Scenes from the night flash through my mind. Julie's agonized scream, the relentless footsteps that pursued us, and the figures forever encased in stone. These memories swirl together into a storm of horror that I'm certain will be a permanent fixture in my mind. As the car accelerates, I find myself glancing in the rearview mirror one last time. There's no sign of the mansion. Just the blackness of the night swallowing the road behind us. But even as the distance grows, bringing us further from that hell, it does nothing to alleviate the profound sense of emptiness I feel. It's as if a part of me is still there, petrified like Julie, a permanent resident of that house of horrors. I'm at the main console following his instructions, adjusting settings and monitoring the readings. Sarah is gathering the necessary tools. "We have to hurry," Sarah says, her voice filled with urgency. They could be here any minute. We nod. Our actions become more hurried, our focus more intense. The machinery whirs and clicks as we manipulate the controls. The readings fluctuate, and the portal reacts to our efforts. The energy begins to shift, the colors changing and the shape warping. "We're getting there," James says, his voice filled with determination. "Just a little more." But then a sudden noise, a screeching that sends chills down our spines. One of the creatures is in the hallway. "We don't have much time," I say, my voice filled with fear. "We have to finish this now." The readings are almost where they need to be, the portal beginning to waver, but the creature is getting closer, its growls and hisses filling the air. "Almost there," James says, his voice strained, his hands working quickly. The creature bursts into the room, its many eyes fixed on us, with its mouths open. The creature lunges at us with an unnatural speed, its twisted limbs reaching, its multiple mouths snapping. Its eyes, a chaotic mess of colors, seem to look in every direction at once, giving it an appearance of madness. Its strength is terrifying, its form like nothing we've ever seen. Tools, metal rods, anything that might serve as a weapon. Our efforts are desperate, our actions driven by pure instinct and the knowledge that failure is not an option. James, his hands still on the controls, shouts, "Keep it away just a bit longer." The creature's skin is like armor, deflecting our blows, resisting our attacks. It moves with a grace that belies its horrific appearance, dodging, weaving, and striking with precision. The sound it makes is a collection of growls, hisses, and screeches that reverberate through the room. We fight with everything we have, pushing the creature back, keeping it at bay, all the while aware of James's continued work on the portal. I catch a glimpse of the portal. It's beginning to collapse, the breach starting to seal, but the creature is relentless, its attacks never ceasing, its determination clear. James yells, his voice filled with both hope and strain. The creature seems to sense the change, its attacks becoming more frenzied, its movements more desperate. It strikes at Sarah and she stumbles as a cry of pain escapes her lips. I move to help her, but the creature seizes the opportunity. It lunges at James, but just as it reaches him, the portal collapses, the energy dissipates, and the breach seals with a sound like thunder. The room shakes. The creature screams, a sound of pure agony, and it's thrown back, away from James, away from the controls. The room falls into sudden silence, the chaos replaced by stillness. We stand, panting, our bodies aching, our minds reeling, looking at the creature as it writhes on the floor, its form changing as its essence is seemingly unraveling. We did it. We look at each other, our faces pale, our bodies covered in sweat and grime, our hearts still pounding. But the creature is still alive and still a threat, which reminds us that the danger is not yet past. We must still find a way to escape the facility, to survive the remaining creatures, to get to safety. With the portal closed and the immediate threat subdued, our attention shifts to our escape from the facility. The creature, weakened by the collapse of the portal, continues to writhe on the floor, but we know we can't waste time watching it. There might be more creatures lurking in the hallways. "We have to leave now," James says, urgency returning to his voice. "We've closed the portal, but we're not safe yet." We quickly gather what we need, taking a few essential tools and some documents that might help us understand what exactly went wrong. We're also aware that the facility's lockdown is still in effect, and we must find a way to override it and reach the exit. "We need to head to the main control room," Sarah suggests. "That's where we can override the lockdown." As we make our way through the facility, the flickering lights reveal more signs of the creature's presence. Claw marks gouging deep into the metal walls. Strange slime that glimmers ominously, and unsettling noises that echo through the abandoned corridors, keeping us on edge. We turn a corner and come across a room with a shattered window. From the inside, we can see that something has clawed its way out, leaving behind a trail of destruction. The sharp smell of some alien substance fills the air, and I feel a shiver run down my spine. "We need to keep moving," James urges. At one point, we hear a skittering sound just behind us, and we freeze. Turning slowly, we see one of the creatures stalking us from a distance. "We need to hide," Sarah says, her eyes wide with terror. We duck into a nearby storage room, holding our breath as the creature creeps past. We wait as time stretches every second in eternity, until we're certain it has moved on. Finally, we emerge and continue our journey. We come across more signs of the creature's passage. Doors torn from their hinges, machines are twisted and destroyed, and strange symbols are carved into the walls as if marking territory. We find the door partially open, hanging off its hinges as if forced open. The sight sends a chill through me, and I can see the concern in my companion's eyes. "Be ready for anything," James warns, his voice steady, but the fear is evident in his eyes. He reaches for a makeshift weapon we'd picked up earlier, and we slowly enter. Inside, we find the control room in disarray. Papers are scattered everywhere, and chairs are overturned. It's clear that something has been here. The room smells foul, and the air is thick with a sense of malice. We immediately set to work, carefully stepping over the debris. James heads straight for the controls. Sarah and I position ourselves by the door, our eyes scanning the hallways, our ears straining for any sound that might signal the approach of the creatures. The minutes drag on as James works to override the lockdown. Sarah and I exchange worried glances, the tension building, the fear growing with every passing moment. We can hear sounds in the distance. We can see the progress on the screens, but it's slow, agonizingly slow, and the threat is never far away. Finally, James lets out a triumphant cry. "I've done it!" he exclaims, his face lighting up with relief and joy. The lockdown is overridden. The facility's alarms fall silent, and the oppressive noise is replaced by a deafening quiet that is somehow even more terrifying. With the lockdown overridden, we waste no time gathering what supplies we can find and heading towards the exit. The facility is eerily silent now, the alarms gone, but the haunting presence of the creatures is still there. We move through the hallways with caution, knowing that the creatures are still out there, knowing that any moment could bring another encounter. Our path is marked by destruction and chaos, the aftermath of the horrors we've unleashed. As we approach the exit, our pace quickens. We turn a corner, and there it is, the exit. It's tantalizingly close. But then we hear it, a growl, low and menacing. A sound that freezes our blood and stops us in our tracks. One of the creatures is near, its twisted form lurking in the shadows, its eyes glowing with malice. We have no choice but to run, our feet pounding on the cold floor, our breath ragged, our hearts racing. The creature gives chase. We reach the exit, the door just ahead, our escape within reach. James reaches for the controls. The door slides open, and we spill out into the night, the creature's roar echoing behind us, a sound that will haunt me forever. We don't stop running, not until the facility is a distant shape in the night. We collapse, our bodies spent, our minds reeling, the terror still fresh, and the memories still raw. We've escaped, but the scars will remain. The knowledge of what we've done, the understanding of what we've unleashed, a burden that we'll carry with us always. We walk away, our steps heavy and our faces pale, knowing that we've survived, but also knowing that we've changed, that we'll never be the same again. "4 months ago, my mother died peacefully in her sleep at the age of 68. I wasn't exactly heartbroken at her unexpected passing. We had been estranged for over 20 years. I hadn't even seen her since I'd left home for the last time, bound for college. No phone calls either, just an occasional Christmas card with a brief impersonal message passed back and forth. My mother had never been a very warm or nurturing presence as I was growing up. Looking back, I think it probably had something to do with her own difficult childhood as a second-generation Irish immigrant in a large working-class family. There was also her older brother, who had committed suicide when she was only 10. We had never gotten along and had clashed often, especially after I entered adolescence, probably because of our vastly different personalities. Whereas I had been a cocky, irreverent, laid-back teen, she had been hard-working, stern, cold, and often harsh. After graduating college in '06, the first in my family to finish high school, let alone earn a degree, I had moved to the city to pursue a career. I had never gone back to visit her, not once. As I was her only close living relative, my father died when I was still very young, and I had been an only child. I inherited my mother's home after she died. It was the same house I had grown up in, and had also been her childhood home, she and my father having bought it from her parents after they got married. I wasn't thrilled about owning the house. I had too many bad memories of it. Also, it was an ugly old place and always had been. A dilapidated 2-story clapboard, well over 100 years old, in a low-income neighborhood of similar decrepit houses. It had probably been a nice place to live at one time. The area where it stood had originally been one of the more upscale parts of the town where I grew up. But that had been before the Great Depression, and the area had gone into an economic decline long before I was born. Hell, even before my parents were born. I had no interest in keeping the property and intended on selling it. But before I did, I decided to make the long overdue trip back home and take one last look at the place where I had grown up. Not so much out of a sense of nostalgia or familial obligation. I was just curious to see how my mother had spent the last years of her life, and also I wanted to check the house and see if there was anything I wanted to take with me before it went on the market. My job keeps me pretty busy, so it wasn't until last month, 3 months after her funeral, that I finally found the time to break away and take a few days off. It was a gray, dreary day, about a week before Thanksgiving, when I finally made the hour-long drive out of the city and back to the town where I had spent my childhood. The old neighborhood hadn't changed much. It was still as depressing and impoverished as I remembered. The same shabby houses, same tiny, unkempt lawns, same weedy, cracked sidewalks and bumpy, poorly maintained streets. I parked alongside the curb and got out of my car, taking a moment to stand and regard the house I hadn't laid eyes on in over 2 decades. It looked even more bleak and squalid than I recalled as a kid. Peeling paint, sagging gutters, crumbling foundation, cracked window panes. Even when compared to its nearly identical run-down neighbors, it somehow stood out in even sharper contrast, like a testament to all the poverty and hopelessness I had experienced living there. Everything I had fled to college to escape from, vowing I would never be as poor as my parents had been. Already I regretted having come back. With a sigh, I reluctantly stepped up the walkway to the front door and unlocked it with the key the executor of my mother's will had given me after her funeral. I entered and began to inspect the house. It was remarkably unchanged. At some point, my mother had replaced the old analog TV in the living room with a modern flat screen. But apart from that, Everything seemed to be exactly the same. Same threadbare furniture, same tacky knickknacks, same faded wallpaper. I went upstairs and walked down the narrow hallway, pausing at my mother's doorway. Dull sunlight filtered in through the shabby curtains, illuminating the gloomy bedroom. I stared at the bare, sagging mattress on the bed where she had died. Her medication still cluttered the bedside table. I stood there for a couple minutes, lost in thought, then moved on. I went to my old bedroom next. At some point after I'd moved out, my mother had turned it into a storage room. My bed and dresser were gone. So were the posters that had once decorated my walls. The shelves that had held my high school sports trophies. I wondered briefly if she'd thrown them out or had put them in the attic. Now contained spare towels and extra toiletries. The air was musty. I went to the undressed, dusty window and peered out at the drab late autumn afternoon. The house was silent apart from my own breathing. My mother had died alone in this dismal house. The house she, unlike me, had never been able to escape from. The very air felt freighted with bad memories. Nothing good had ever happened here. "I finally came home, Mom," I whispered, my voice choking on the final word. I felt the sting of tears in my eyes. Even though I still didn't mourn her as I probably should have, I did feel an overwhelming sense of sorrow and regret that we had never reconciled while there had still been time, or had been closer during her last few years. There was nothing here I wanted to keep. I left my former bedroom and went downstairs. I don't know what motivated me to go down into the basement. There was nothing down there that would have interested me. I could just as easily have left the house right then and gone home. Maybe it was just a desire to be thorough. I had already checked out the rest of the house, and once I left, I knew I would never come back. The basement door was in the kitchen, between the refrigerator and the pantry. I opened it, flipped on the light, and descended the creaking wooden steps to the bottom. The basement was located directly beneath the kitchen. It was a small, dank, low-ceilinged room, hardly bigger than a walk-in closet. Rough stone walls and a concrete floor dimly illuminated by a single bare light bulb. It was mostly barren except for the washer and dryer, a shelf full of cleaning supplies, and some old tools cluttering one corner. I looked around with passing curiosity. When I turned to the rear wall, I couldn't help but crack a small smile. Still there. For as long as I could remember, the back wall of the basement had been dominated by a huge canvas mural depicting the black silhouettes of jitterbugging 1950s teenagers dancing against a white background. I had no idea why my grandparents, presumably since they had owned the house before my parents, had put it there. Maybe as a lame attempt to add a little cheer to such a dingy space. Whatever the reason, it was still there after all these years, although now it was badly faded, the canvas dirty and mildewed and tattered with age. Still smiling, I started to turn away to leave the basement and the house. But at the last second, something caught my eye. I approached and crouched down for a closer look, puzzled. The bottom of the old mural had pulled away from the wall and curled up a few inches over the years, probably due to the dampness of the basement, and what was revealed wasn't bare stone, but wood. Intrigued, I grasped the frayed edge of the mural and pulled it up more, the rotted canvas ripping a little, exposing more wood. For a second, I didn't understand what I was seeing. Then it hit me, and I was stunned. It was a door, a secret door hidden behind the old, tasteless mural for God only knew how many years. A dozen questions rushed through my mind upon this discovery, chiefly among them, who had hidden this door? Why was it hidden? And most importantly, what was on the other side of it? In a sudden burst of excitement, I unthinkingly seized the mural and pulled it with all my strength, tearing it completely away from the rear wall of the basement, fully exposing the concealed door. I stood there, transfixed in shock, staring. The door looked ancient. Somehow it appeared even older than the house itself. It was rounded at the top, constructed of thick, heavy slabs of wood bound together with iron bands. There was no knob, just a large iron pull ring. It looked like a door you'd see in a medieval castle. An old, but still relatively modern looking, padlock was fastened to a hasp that secured it to the wall. But what surprised me most of all wasn't so much the door itself, but the large manila envelope that had been stapled to it, and carefully printed in faded letters on the envelope was my own name, and a message in big block letters: "For the love of God, never open this door." I pulled the manila envelope loose and examined it closely. It didn't look like it had been left there any time recently. It seemed to have been there for a long time. Years, maybe even decades. Maybe since I had been a very young child. I recognized the handwriting as my mother's. There was something inside the envelope. It felt like some kind of document. I looked at the envelope and its ominous warning: "For the love of God, never open this door!" Then at the mysterious door, the ancient-looking, out-of-place door that had been kept hidden in my childhood home for all this time. Then back at the envelope in my hands, I was utterly baffled. For the love of God, never open this door. So of course, like the idiot I was before even opening the envelope to examine its contents, I made opening the door I was explicitly instructed to never open my first priority. Notwithstanding the love of the Supreme Being. But really, who could blame me? Who in my position would have been able to withstand the temptation to act in direct opposition to such a grave edict regardless of the potential consequences? Curiosity killed the cat, right? There was a locked door in my old house that had remained a secret from me my entire life. Obviously, it had been kept a secret for a reason. Said reason was almost certainly detailed in whatever my mother had left for me in the envelope. I could have taken the time to look at the contents of the envelope for explanation, but quite frankly, I didn't feel like taking the time to do that. I needed immediate satisfaction. I wanted to solve this enigma in the most direct and prompt manner possible. I needed to open that fucking door. I looked at the padlock. It didn't seem likely I would find the key after all this time. And besides, upon closer inspection, I realized the keyhole had been filled with solder, making a search of the house a moot point. I looked over at the old, rusty tools cluttering the corner of the basement. I rummaged through them, thinking I might find a crowbar or something I could use to pry off the hasp. Instead, I found something even better, a large bolt cutter. Perfect. I opened the bolt cutters and fastened the blades to the padlock's shackle. With a bit of effort, I was able to snap the padlock. I tossed it aside and grasped the iron pull ring. I had no idea what I was expecting to find on the other side of the door. A wild menagerie of different possibilities flashed through my imagination, everything from hidden valuables to dead bodies. I had to quell my excitement by reminding myself that this was probably how Geraldo Rivera had felt in the moments before opening Al Capone's hidden vault. I hesitated for a moment, bracing myself for whatever discovery I was about to make, then pulled hard. The door opened with surprising ease, given that it had to have been shut for, well, God only knew how long. The hinges moved smoothly and soundlessly. I pulled it all the way open and stared through the doorway at nothing. Nothing but blackness. Utter blackness. I took out my phone, turned on its flashlight, and aimed it into the darkness. But it illuminated nothing. Shit. Thinking the phone's light simply wasn't powerful enough, I rushed back upstairs and frantically searched through the kitchen cabinets and drawers until I found the big 4-cell Maglite I remembered from my childhood. A long, heavy flashlight with a powerful beam. I turned it on to test the batteries, saw it worked, then scrambled back into the basement. I shined the light into the doorway and was perplexed. The flashlight's beam didn't reveal anything in the dark space beyond the threshold. It didn't cast a spotlight circle of brightness upon the rear wall of the secret room or disclose anything the room might have contained. The beam of light seemed strangely diffused. The beam didn't seem to penetrate the illimitable blackness so much as be absorbed by it. It was like aiming a flashlight at the night sky, as if there was nothing solid for the shaft of light to fix upon. I couldn't make sense of it. What I was seeing was impossible. Standing there, contemplating that Stygian abyss, I had the impression that I was looking upon some vast, lightless space of unknown, enormous proportion, a space that seemed to illogically defy the physical dimensions of my mother's house. I felt a sudden flood of overwhelming, existential dread and horror, something close to madness. I felt as if I was peering through a doorway into the godless black void of non-existence that must stand beyond the furthest reaches of the universe, a place where nothing was or ever had been or would be. It was like looking into the mouth of hell. Robert. For a few seconds, I didn't even register the voice, thinking perhaps I had only imagined it. But then it spoke my name again. Robert. It was my mother's voice. I recognized it clearly, even though I hadn't heard it in more than 20 years. My dead mother's voice, whispering my name from the black gulf beyond the doorway. I was galvanized with sudden primal terror, so intense that coherent thought became almost impossible. I began to tremble. I couldn't even breathe. The voice spoke again, faintly, as if speaking from a great distance, but unmistakably my late mother's, and the urgent pleading in it was also unmistakable. Please, Robert, help me. This isn't real. Some part of my mind spoke up, trying to maintain its sanity and make logical sense of what was happening. It cannot be real. You're dreaming. Please, Robert, help me. The disembodied voice beseeched, imploring desperately. Help me. It's so cold and dark in here. The voice was trying to coax me through the doorway into the unknown blackness. And with sudden chilling certainty, I understand it was not my mother speaking to me, attempting to lure me to it. Please, Robert. My paralysis snapped. I reached suddenly, compulsively for the door and slammed it shut, blocking out that awful, unnatural darkness. Immediately the voice fell silent. Gasping with a sudden rush of panicked adrenaline, I closed the hasp. My eyes darted around the basement. The padlock was ruined, but I found a screwdriver amidst the old tools and inserted it into the hasp, securing the door. Then I ran upstairs, pausing only long enough to grab the still unopened envelope my mother had addressed to me. I fled the house, leaped into my car and drove away, and I haven't returned since. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. When I got home about an hour later, I was almost back to normal. I spent most of the return journey in a state of shock, driving my car on autopilot, barely aware of my surroundings, until I was only a few miles away from my apartment. Then I had to pull into a gas station as I was struck by a crippling panic attack. I opened my door and thrust my head out just in time to avoid vomiting into my car. Then I just leaned back with my hands over my face, weeping and gasping for 10 minutes until I had myself more or less back under control. I entered my apartment, shut the door, then sat down on my couch and examined the manila envelope I had found on the hidden basement door. Robert, for the love of God, never open this door. I opened it. It contained a sheaf of musty-smelling handwritten pages. I began to read, and as I read, I began to understand why my mother had kept that door a secret from me all these years, and why she had left me a warning for when I would inevitably discover it. The first page was dated the year I was born. My mother had written this and left it for me nearly 40 years before, when I had still been an infant. She must have been terrified something might happen to her, or that she wouldn't be present to warn me in the event that I stumbled upon the door while I was still a child. I read, and I began to feel that familiar cold dread creeping into my body, just as it had when I first opened the door. My mother had been born the year after her parents had immigrated to the U.S. from Ireland. They had bought the old house when she was 5, having saved up for it for several years working their grueling menial jobs as factory workers. Even then the house had been run down, but it had been cheap, and it was all they could afford, and they had still been grateful to own an actual home of their own, a place they could raise their family instead of the cramped slum apartment they had all been sharing. 3 years passed uneventfully in the house. The terror began when my mother was 8. She and her 10-year-old brother had been the youngest of 5 children, the older 3 already being adults who had joined their parents in the workforce. As a result, when they weren't in school, they were often alone in the house until the rest of the family got home in the evening. This probably sounds like child neglect to you, but bear in mind, this was the early 1960s and times were different then. It was her brother who found the door in the basement. At the time, it had been concealed behind a set of shelves that contained old jars of preserves left behind by the previous owner. It was a chilly, windy day in late fall, during their autumn break from school. They had been playing hide and seek, and he had squeezed into the narrow space between the shelves and the wall, and that was how he had discovered it. When their parents and older siblings got home, he had told them what he had found. Intrigued, their father and her two older brothers had removed the shelves, exposing the door. It had been locked with an ancient brass padlock, one of those round railroad locks like you see in old Western films, and didn't look like it had been opened in at least a century. The padlock was so old and corroded that it crumbled to dust when her father gave it a single tug. Their father had opened the door, shined a flashlight, taken a single look inside, then immediately slammed the door. My mother wrote that she had never seen her father look so frightened as he had right then. Never before, and never after. He had sternly told his 5 children to never open that door or ever go near it again. He had refused to answer any questions and had sent them all to bed. That night, my mother had heard her parents talking urgently in their bedroom. She had pressed her ear to the wall and listened. She couldn't make out everything they were saying, but she did hear her father say something to her mother about his sister laughing in the dark and buying a new lock at the hardware store tomorrow. She said their voices were low and heated, but it didn't sound like they were fighting. It sounded like they were just scared. My mother was troubled by what her father had said about hearing his sister laughing. Her father had only had one sister, who would have been my mother's aunt, but she had died when he was still a child living in Ireland. My mother had been frightened, but her brother had been intrigued. He had wanted to know what his father could have seen or heard on the other side of that door that would have upset him so much. His curiosity overrode any trepidation he may have had. Later that night, after the rest of the family was asleep, he had disobeyed his father's order. He had gotten up, gone down to the basement, and opened the door. The next morning, my mother had awakened to the sound of my grandmother screaming her husband's name in a panic. Her voice had been coming from the basement. The family had hurried down to the basement. My mother had observed her mother standing over my uncle, who was huddled in the corner, shuddering spasmodically. My mother wrote that she never forgot what she saw. She said it haunted her for the rest of her life. Her brother's face was contorted in a grimace of pure, incomprehensible terror, his eyes bulging from their sockets, his teeth bared like a snarling dog's. His hair had turned completely white. His bulging, unblinking eyes were fixed in a direct line of sight with the secret basement door, which was standing wide open on a rectangular of total blackness. He was alive, but was in a state of full catatonia, unable to speak or move or react to any stimuli. My grandparents had called an ambulance, and my uncle was rushed to the hospital. My father immediately bought a new padlock and sealed the basement door. My uncle was put in a mental institution. The doctors thought he would never recover, but miraculously, against all expectations, he eventually did, although it was over a year before he was functional enough to return home. He was never fully the same after that. He was withdrawn and quiet and morose, prone to emotional outbursts and panic attacks. He had trouble sleeping and often experienced nightmares and night terrors when he did sleep. He refused to answer any questions about what had happened to him that night and would scream in fits of hysteria if prodded. He absolutely refused to set foot in the basement or even go near the door in the kitchen that led down there. He would become violent if anyone tried to make him. His condition gradually deteriorated over the next year. He lost weight and developed dark rings around his eyes from lack of sleep. He became paranoid and jumped at every sound. My grandparents would have sent him to a psychiatrist if they could have, but they simply couldn't afford it. One night after bedtime, he broke down crying and finally told my mother what had happened that night almost 2 years before. When he opened the door, He had heard a voice speaking to him from the darkness, not a scary or a threatening voice. It was a friendly voice, a voice he even recognized. "Whose voice?" my mother asked him. "Captain Kangaroo," my uncle had stammered to her, referencing a popular children's television show from the time that he had been fond of. It was Captain Kangaroo. He spoke to me by name. He told me I could come inside and play with him in the treasure house. He had stepped through the dark doorway into the gulf of the unknown. "What did you see in there?" my mother had anxiously asked him. My uncle had been quiet for several long moments. Tears rolled down his cheeks. My mother could see fear rising in his eyes as he forced the words out. It wasn't the treasure house. It wasn't Captain Kangaroo in there. He paused to gulp, then choked out, "There are things in there, in the darkness, things you can see but can't see." My mother had been confused by that statement. Things you can see but can't see. But my uncle hadn't, or perhaps couldn't explain it any better than that. Reading those words, I felt a chill envelop my whole body, as if hundreds of ice cubes were being pressed against my skin. Things you can see but can't see. My uncle told her he had been lost in the darkness with those things, hunted by them, running from them, hiding from them, unable to find the doorway that led back to the basement. "It's bigger in there than you think," he said. "So much bigger. It's endless in there." Until just by blind chance he had stumbled through it, away from that awful, godless blackness. He told her that he probably hadn't been in there more than an hour at most, but time is different inside. It felt like he had been trapped in there for many years, perhaps even centuries. My uncle told my mother that he couldn't stand to live with what he had experienced any longer. He said it felt like some part of him had never left that secret basement room and was still trapped in there for eternity. He had hugged her and kissed her and told her he was sorry, then had left her room. My mother was bewildered and frightened and confused by what he had meant with his final words. "I'm sorry." That was the last time she ever saw her brother alive. He had taken his father's straight razor from the bathroom and slit his wrists in his bed that same night. My uncle had been 12 years old. She had never told her parents what her brother had told her the night before he killed himself. They were already so overwhelmed with grief and horror, she didn't think they could bear it. But they must have suspected his death had something to do with whatever her had experienced in the basement. They had barricaded the door and strictly forbid the rest of their children from ever going down there again. My grandmother had been the only one to enter the basement to do the laundry, and even then, she tried to keep her visits as brief as possible. My grandparents wouldn't allow them to talk about my uncle or his death, and even mentioning his name would cause them to get slapped, as my mother painfully learned early on. They wanted to forget about him and put the whole terrible ordeal behind them. My mother often wondered why her parents hadn't sold the house and moved them somewhere else for a fresh start, why they had continued to live there after what had happened. She assumed it was probably because of their lack of money. But then, years later, when she was a young woman and married my father, her parents, aging and in failing health, asked her if she and her new husband would take the house from them when they died. My mother said that my grandmother didn't so much offer as beg them to live there. My mother couldn't believe her parents would want the house to remain in the family after the loss they had suffered there. But my grandmother had told my mother she couldn't stand the thought of the house falling into someone else's possession, someone who didn't know about the door in the basement, someone who might also have children. Reading that, I suddenly understood everything. I understood why my mother had been so strict and overbearing when I was a child, so overprotective of me, why she had always been so moody and serious, why she had continued to live in that gloomy house with its burden of tragedy and painful memories all those years, right up until the day she died. I understood why she had hidden the door behind that old mural with a warning in the event that I would someday uncover it after she was gone. She had been guarding that door, guarding the door to prevent some other unfortunate, unknowing soul from opening it and being lured into the darkness by a familiar, trusted voice, as her brother had been. I understood something else. I could never sell that house. I had to keep it in my possession, take up my mother's mantle as its guardian, for the rest of my life. There is something in the darkness beyond that old wooden door. Something terrible that doesn't belong in our world. Something unnatural and unholy. Something you can see, but can't see.